Now that we have finished the calorie king activity, we can finally figure out, so what do we really eat? What were the top 3 components in our food? Uh, Even if you just watched the video of the one that I did, the top 2 components were already total carbohydrates and I think it was total carbohydrates and total fat, and then our next one was already protein. So those are the top 3 components of our food. So like I said, proteins, fats, and carbs. So here are some examples. And hopefully you know which category each of them go into, but like things like meat and beans go into proteins. Things about bread go into carbohydrates, and then butters and oils go into fats or lipids. So we will write that now or down now on page 32. So in our books, it's box H, top 3 components of food. We have proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. So the matter in our food is made mostly up of molecules of protein, fats, and carbohydrates. That's what we just wrote in box H. But do we know anything else made of these molecules? Like, let's think about it. What else could be made of protein, fats, and carbohydrates? Hopefully you said you, and every other living thing. So all living things are made up of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates because have you ever heard the term of like you are what you eat? Well, this is why. Because if you watched the Amoeba Sisters video, it said that you were eating their DNA, or it broke it down into the molecules that humans and everything else are made out of. So here's actually the composition of the human body. I think we're a little bit more than 65% water, but they broke it down into smaller things. So we'll say 65% water for this case. About 20% protein, which is, remember, our muscles, and then fats is about 12% for the average human. Then there's carbohydrates, minerals, DNA, and RNA, which would be those nucleic acids. So do you think it's just a weird coincidence that our food is made up of the same stuff that as the bodies of all living things, including us? Like, do you think that's just randomly done? So if we think about it, it's probably not randomly done. But do the fats from food become your fat? Does the protein that we take in become our protein and muscles? Do the carbohydrates we take in become our carbohydrates? Are we 100% exactly what we eat? Does like the muscle fibers from the cow that you ate turn into your muscle fibers? Does everything we eat get incorporated into our bodies? Well, sort of. So we are what we eat, but it's kind of like sort of. So what about the energy in our food? What is it, quote, made out of? So what do we call the energy in our food? It's called a calorie. So when we were doing Calorie King, that's actually what a calorie is. Calorie is the amount of energy needed to heat 1 kilogram of water up 1 degree Celsius. So with 100 calories, you could potentially heat 1 kilogram of water 100 degrees just from melting away, just from going to melting all the way to boiling. So how exactly is this energy then stored in food? We will get to that later, but we do want to keep thinking about that in calories and like a calorie is a unit of energy. So what did we figure out? What were the big ideas we gotten from our investigation of using Calorie King? Like, why did we look at our food? So let's write down our big ideas. We found out that, like, number one, protein, fats, and carbs go into our bodies and at the same time are what living things are made of. Why do we need to take in food? We know that food is fuel. And we need to remember that calories is just a unit or an amount of energy. that we use to do work or to get something done. So then we're going to break it down a little bit further. So if you already watched the Amoeba Sisters video, we're going to break down these proteins, fats, and carbs a little bit further. So I'm a little annoyed, but the printing format kind of messed up again. So we're going to kind of fix this. This is all like the title stuff. And then it goes, carbs are kind of in their own category. And then fats. So it should look like that. So this is the area of the big molecule. This is the component or what it's made up of, the chemical formula, and then the elements that it contains. So we want to dive a little deeper in going in on what proteins, carbs, and fats are. So what do molecules of protein, fat, and carbohydrates look like? So here's a protein. It is obviously very big. It kind of looks like a big jumble of all these little ball things that are representing the elements in the atoms. But if you take one of these sections and you stretch it out, it kind of looks like this linked chain. So that is a protein. The fat molecule kind of looks like this weird human if it only had one leg, with all these big blobs of, again, they are elements and atoms. That's just how you show them in like a chemistry situation. And then a carbohydrate, it looks like a pretty little chain of all these circles of carbons. So like I said, these little circles, it's called a ball and stick model. If you take chemistry, it does represent an atom, and each different color is a different atom. So all the black ones are carbons. I think the white ones are oxygens. I'm not sure about all of them. And then maybe the red ones are hydrogens. Maybe it's opposite, but I know that those ones are included. So what is a carbohydrate made out of? Carbohydrates are chains of sugar. So remember I said like this, there's a really long chain and they look like little circles of carbons. So they come out really pretty looking if you were into chemistry. Sugars do come in different forms, but all are made up of the same basic parts of carbon in the black, oxygen in the red, and hydrogen in the white. So those are the actual colors. And so this is an example of glucose, but there are other forms. Here again is that monomer of a monosaccharide. And then here's the chemical formula. So how many carbons, how many hydrogens, and how many oxygens. You'll learn this in chemistry, but the number underneath means how many or the amount. And here would be a carbon chain or circle. So we're going to write this in our... So the carbohydrates, remember the component molecule is made up of glucose. That would be like a single unit. Our chemical formula was C6H12O6. And that means those are the elements it's made up of. So the C is for carbon, the H is for hydrogen, and the O is for oxygen. And then we're going to break it down into what is in a fat. So there are many kinds of fat, but they have one common structure. Here is a type that's called a triglyceride. So if you think of it, there's 3 glycerins or glycerides here that you may have heard about before. So there's a glycerol group, and then there's 3 fatty acid chains. Again, it's hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. And here is the chemical formula. So it's a lot bigger. It has 44 carbons, 86 hydrogens, and only 6 oxygens. And there are different kinds of fats. So when you're thinking about saturated fats, they are solid at room temperature. That would be things like butter. It's called saturated because if you look at the chain of carbons, it is full or saturated of hydrogens. Unsaturated would be a liquid at room temperature. So these would be things like certain dressings and oils. And if you look, there's a double bond here between the 2 carbons, which means that it's not full of hydrogens compared to the saturated. So there's it actually makes like a bend in the molecule, so they can't be full of hydrogens. And then there's the trans or hydrogenated fats. So these are artificially made, so that's why they're like the not good for you types of fats, because they're artificially, because they force in like a lab, they like make the hydrogen atoms chemically bond onto the natural unsaturated fatty acids. So it would be like taking this oil and like making more of these double bonds so that less of these hydrogens could be out here and more of them would be connected. It's used in a lot of fast food and processed foods. That's why it's called that it's artificially, because it's processed. Trans fats are solid room at temperatures, and they're really bad for our cardiovascular health. So things like fast food, donuts, French fries, a lot of those like super like fatty and like oily substances. So we're going to write that out right now. Under fats, there are 3 types. There's saturated, there's unsaturated, and then there's trans fats. The single unit is a triglyceride, the 3 groups, the 3 fatty acid chains on a glyceride group. And it's bigger. There's 44 carbons, there's 86 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. But again, they're still just made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So we have been using a lot of terms, which is why we kind of went through that review about mass and matter. So let's make sure we're on the same page. So again, remember that matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Examples would be anything: dust, water, air, wood. And then we wrote about those elements. Elements are pure substances that all matter is made out of. So all elements are known or are shown on the periodic table. The examples would be the ones that we're talking about: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. And then I said iron in our example, but there's also gold. Then an atom is the smallest particle you can have of an element. An example would be like 1 single carbon atom, 1 hydrogen atom. And then our molecules, remember, are 2 or more atoms bonded together forming a new substance. So that would be like oxygen, water, carbon dioxide. And this is the periodic table, so all elements can be found on the periodic table. All right, and then the last one we have is proteins. We're going to read a short piece about proteins, and then we're going to take the big ideas of the protein reading and then write about proteins in our notes.